If someone had told me that the man sitting in the passenger seat of my car every morning was secretly planning to destroy my daughter's future, I would have laughed. Instead, I spent 6 weeks driving him to work while he looked me in the eye every single day without realizing I was her father. What I overheard one rainy morning changed everything, and from that moment on, I stopped being just a driver. I became the man who would quietly dismantle every lie he had built. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 62 years old, a widower, and a retired construction company owner. After selling my business 3 years earlier, I lived comfortably without needing to work another day. Most mornings, I volunteered at a local veterans center or helped neighbors with repairs simply because I like staying busy. My daughter Emma was 30 years old and the only family I had left. She was intelligent, independent, and kind, the type of person who believed everyone deserved a second chance. That quality made me proud, but it also made me worry because people like Emma often attracted those who knew exactly how to exploit kindness. When Emma told me she was engaged to a man named Ryan Brooks, I tried to be supportive. She described him as ambitious, hardworking, and determined to build a future together. She said he worked for a financial consulting firm downtown and dreamed of starting his own company one day. I met him twice before they announced their engagement. He was charming, polished, and always knew exactly what to say. Still, something felt rehearsed about him. Every compliment sounded practiced. Every smile arrived a second too late. I couldn't explain why, so I kept my concerns to myself because I didn't want to become the overprotective father who judged every man his daughter dated. A few weeks later, Emma called me one evening sounding frustrated. Ryan's car had broken down, and the repair shop estimated it would take at least a month to replace the engine. He refused to spend money on rental cars because he claimed they were too expensive. Emma wanted to drive him herself every morning before work, but doing so would force her to leave home nearly 2 hours earlier every day. She sounded exhausted before she had even started. I offered a simple solution. I told her I had plenty of free time and could drive him downtown each morning. She hesitated at first because she didn't want to inconvenience me, but I insisted. I said it would give me an excuse to get out of the house early and enjoy the morning drive. The following Monday, I parked outside Ryan's apartment building at exactly 7 o'clock. He walked outside wearing an expensive navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked far newer than someone supposedly struggling financially should own. He climbed into the passenger seat, thanked me politely, and immediately buried his face in his phone. We exchanged small talk about traffic, weather, and sports. He asked what I had done before retirement. I simply told him I had worked in construction management. I never mentioned owning the company because I preferred people to judge me without knowing my financial situation. He nodded with little interest and spent the rest of the drive answering messages. The routine quickly became familiar. Every weekday morning, I picked him up at 7 sharp. Some mornings he barely spoke. Other mornings he complained endlessly about co-workers, clients, or how unfair life had become. I noticed he always presented himself as the victim. If a project failed, someone else had sabotaged him. If a client left, the client had been unreasonable. Nothing was ever his responsibility. Years of running a business had taught me that people who never accepted blame rarely accepted honesty either. During those drives I also noticed inconsistencies. Ryan often claimed he was struggling financially, yet he wore designer watches, expensive shoes, and frequently talked about exclusive restaurants where he entertained clients. Once he accidentally left his bank notification open on his phone while showing me directions around a traffic jam. I caught only a brief glance, but the balance displayed was far higher than someone claiming to be nearly broke should have had. He quickly locked the screen, unaware I had seen anything. Emma, meanwhile, seemed happier than ever. She spent evenings planning the wedding and showing me pictures of venues, flowers, and invitations. Every time I looked at her smiling face, I wanted to ignore the uncomfortable feeling growing inside me. Maybe I was simply looking too hard for flaws because no man would ever seem good enough for my daughter. I reminded myself of that repeatedly. By the third week, Ryan had become comfortable enough to speak freely around me. He treated me like an invisible chauffeur rather than Emma's father. He rarely asked about my life anymore. Instead, he took phone calls during our rides, assuming I wasn't paying attention. Most conversations were harmless business discussions, but occasionally he lowered his voice whenever certain names came up. One name appeared again and again. Vanessa. Whenever he spoke to her, his tone changed completely. It became playful, confident, even flirtatious. When I casually asked whether Vanessa was someone from his office, he smiled without looking up from his phone and said she handled marketing for one of his clients. The explanation sounded reasonable, yet something about the smile bothered me. A few days later, I dropped him off earlier than usual because he claimed he had an important breakfast meeting. As he stepped out of the car, he forgot his briefcase on the back seat. I called after him, but he was already hurrying across the street. I parked safely, grabbed the briefcase, and walked toward the cafe where he had entered. Before reaching the entrance, I glanced through the large front window. Ryan wasn't meeting a group of business executives. He was sitting alone with a woman around his own age. She leaned across the table and kissed him before either of them opened a menu. He laughed, held her hand, and looked far more relaxed than I had ever seen him around Emma. I stood frozen for several seconds before quietly turning around. I wasn't interested in creating a public confrontation based on one moment I couldn't fully explain. Maybe there was some bizarre misunderstanding. Maybe the kiss wasn't what it appeared to be. Still, the image stayed with me for the rest of the day. That evening Emma excitedly told me Ryan had worked through breakfast because of an important client meeting. She smiled proudly while repeating the exact lie he had told her. I forced myself to smile back, but inside, the doubts I had tried to ignore were becoming impossible to dismiss. I didn't know exactly what Ryan was hiding yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My daughter was trusting a man whose stories no longer matched his actions, and I had no intention of looking away until I uncovered the truth. The morning that changed everything started with heavy rain. Traffic crawled through downtown, and Ryan seemed irritated from the moment he climbed into my car. He barely acknowledged me before answering a phone call through his wireless earbuds. Normally, he kept his voice low whenever he discussed personal matters, but the storm was pounding so hard against the roof that he assumed I couldn't hear him. He was wrong. As we sat motionless behind a line of cars, I caught every word. "Just be patient," he said with a quiet laugh. "The wedding is only 6 weeks away. Once we're married, everything transfers naturally. She trusts me enough to sign anything. After that, I'll file for divorce within the year. She'll be devastated, but I'll already have what I came for." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. Years in business had taught me that anger clouds judgment. Evidence wins. Ryan continued speaking as though he had already won. "Her father is just some retired old guy. He won't even know what's happening until it's over. The lake house alone is worth more than I expected. Add her investment accounts, and we'll never have to worry about money again. Then he laughed. "Vanessa, we're almost there. Trust me." The call ended just as traffic began moving. Ryan looked out the window, completely unaware that every sentence had reached my ears. I drove the rest of the way in silence, dropped him off with the same polite smile I had worn every morning, and watched him disappear into the building. The moment he entered, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him. I was going to let him believe his plan was working while I quietly destroyed every advantage he thought he had. That afternoon I called my attorney, Michael, a man I had trusted for nearly 30 years. Without mentioning names over the phone, I asked him to meet me privately. After listening carefully, he leaned back in his chair and said, "If what you heard is accurate, don't accuse him yet. People like this reveal far more when they think nobody suspects them." He helped me review every legal document connected to my estate. Although I had sold my construction company years earlier, I still owned several commercial properties, the family lake house, and investment accounts that would eventually pass to Emma. Until that meeting, most of my assets were scheduled to transfer directly after my death. Michael recommended restructuring everything into a trust with strict conditions that no spouse could access or control. Emma would remain the sole beneficiary, but anyone marrying her would gain absolutely no ownership rights. We spent hours updating paperwork, changing beneficiary structures, and adding protective clauses that made Ryan's imagined payday disappear before he even reached the altar. The documents were signed within days, and not a single member of my family knew they existed. That solved only one problem. Ryan wasn't after my estate alone. He believed Emma herself could be manipulated into signing away her own assets. I needed to know how far he had already gone. Over the following week, I paid closer attention during our morning drives. Once he believed I wasn't listening, his phone conversations became a gold mine of information. Vanessa wasn't a marketing consultant. She was his girlfriend. They spoke every day, sometimes twice before lunch. They laughed about wedding gifts, joked about honeymoon destinations they would eventually visit together, and even mocked Emma's trusting nature. Listening without reacting became one of the hardest things I had ever done. Every insult felt personal, but I reminded myself that exposing the truth required patience. One Friday morning Ryan received another call while we were waiting at a railroad crossing. "Did she sign the insurance forms?" Vanessa asked. Ryan smiled. "Almost. I told her it was just routine paperwork from the wedding planner. She never reads anything carefully." My stomach tightened. Emma was intelligent, but she trusted the people she loved. Ryan understood that better than anyone. After dropping him off, I drove directly to Emma's apartment. I didn't tell her what I had overheard because I knew she would confront him immediately, and he would simply deny everything. Instead, I casually asked whether she had signed any financial or legal documents recently. She thought for a moment before mentioning several forms Ryan had asked her to complete, including life insurance paperwork connected to his employer's benefits package. She admitted she hadn't read every page because Ryan had already highlighted the signature lines. I asked whether she still had copies. She said Ryan insisted on mailing everything himself. That answer confirmed exactly what I feared. I contacted Michael again. He introduced me to a private investigator named Laura Bennett, a former fraud detective with an exceptional reputation. After hearing the situation, she agreed to conduct a discreet background investigation. Within 4 days she delivered the first report. Ryan Brooks wasn't simply dishonest. He had reinvented himself several times over the past decade. He had used different addresses, changed jobs almost every year, accumulated substantial personal debt, and quietly settled 2 civil lawsuits involving financial deception. More disturbing was his relationship with an elderly widow 3 years earlier. According to public records, he had convinced her to invest nearly $200,000 in a non-existent business opportunity before disappearing. Criminal charges were never filed because the woman lacked sufficient evidence, but the pattern was unmistakable. Ryan targeted trusting people with financial resources. Emma wasn't his first victim. She was simply his largest opportunity. The investigator uncovered something even worse. Vanessa wasn't merely his girlfriend. She had lived with him until just 3 months before he proposed to Emma. Their apartment lease, utility bills, and shared bank transactions proved they were still financially connected despite pretending otherwise. Laura even obtained recent photographs of the two of them entering restaurants, hotels, and weekend resorts together while Ryan claimed to be traveling for business. Every piece of evidence strengthened the case, but I still wasn't satisfied. I wanted undeniable proof that would leave Ryan with no room to lie. As fate would have it, that proof arrived unexpectedly. One Monday morning Ryan climbed into my car looking unusually cheerful. Halfway through the drive, he received a video call. He accidentally accepted it before connecting his earbuds, causing the conversation to play through the car speakers for several seconds. Vanessa appeared on the screen smiling. "Did your future millionaire fiancé finally pick the wedding venue?" she joked. Ryan laughed loudly. "She's paying for almost everything herself. Why would I stop her?" He quickly grabbed the phone and connected his earbuds, but the damage was already done. I had heard enough. More importantly, I noticed he had unknowingly activated the screen recording function while fumbling with the phone. A red recording icon remained visible before he locked the screen. If that recording saved automatically, then somewhere on his own phone existed a permanent record of exactly how he spoke about Emma. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could see the end taking shape. Ryan believed he was carefully manipulating everyone around him, but every lie he told created another thread I could eventually pull. He still thought I was nothing more than a retired old driver passing time behind the wheel. He had absolutely no idea that every morning he stepped into my car, he was driving deeper into the trap I was building around him. By the end of the week, I would have enough evidence to protect my daughter, expose his betrayal, and make sure the life he had spent years constructing collapsed in front of everyone who mattered. By the beginning of the following week, every piece was finally in place. Laura's investigation had produced hundreds of pages of records, photographs, financial documents, and timelines. Michael had secured every legal protection around my estate and Emma's inheritance. I had quietly documented Ryan's conversations, dates, and suspicious behavior in a journal that matched the investigators' findings almost perfectly. The only thing missing was the moment Ryan exposed himself in a way he could never explain away. Fortunately, people who believe they are smarter than everyone else usually become careless at exactly the wrong time. 3 days before the wedding, Emma invited me to dinner with Ryan at her apartment. She wanted us to spend more time together because she believed we were finally becoming close. Ryan acted like the perfect future son-in-law. He complimented the meal, asked about my retirement, and even thanked me for driving him every morning. Watching him perform was almost impressive. If I hadn't known the truth, I probably would have believed every word. During dessert, Emma excused herself to answer a phone call from the wedding planner. Ryan looked at me, smiled confidently, and said, "I really appreciate everything you've done for us. Emma is lucky to have a father like you." I simply nodded. "Take good care of her," I replied. He looked me directly in the eyes and answered, "I always will." It was the biggest lie he had ever spoken, and he had no idea I already knew it. The rehearsal dinner arrived 2 nights later. Nearly every close friend and family member attended. Ryan's parents were there along with co-workers, neighbors, and members of Emma's bridal party. Everyone celebrated what they believed would be a perfect wedding. I spent the evening quietly observing. Ryan laughed, shook hands, posed for photographs, and accepted congratulations like a man already celebrating his victory. Several times I caught him checking his phone with a smile that disappeared the moment Emma looked in his direction. Around 9 o'clock, he stepped outside onto the restaurant patio to take another call. Laura, who had been hired as event security under a different name, positioned herself close enough to hear him without being noticed. When he returned inside, she simply looked at me and nodded. He had just confirmed to Vanessa that after the honeymoon he intended to convince Emma to combine their finances before filing for divorce within the year. He also joked that her father was too old to notice anything. That sentence almost made me laugh because I had noticed everything. The wedding morning arrived bright and clear. Emma looked happier than I had seen her in years. Watching her smile nearly convinced me to stop everything quietly and explain the truth in private. But I knew Ryan would spend years telling people I had destroyed the wedding because I never accepted him. No. He needed to expose himself publicly, with evidence no one could deny. 30 minutes before the ceremony, I asked Emma if we could speak alone. I handed her a folder. She looked confused as she opened it. The first photograph showed Ryan kissing Vanessa outside the cafe. The second showed them entering a hotel together. Then came copies of shared bank statements, apartment leases, lawsuit records, investigator reports, and transcripts of conversations. Finally, I handed her a small recorder containing the conversation I had overheard in traffic. I watched her expression change from confusion to disbelief, then heartbreak. Tears filled her eyes as Ryan's own voice calmly explained his plan to marry her for money before divorcing her. She didn't cry loudly. She simply sat in silence until the recording ended. After several minutes she looked at me and asked one question. "Is every bit of this real?" I answered honestly. "Every single page." She closed the folder, wiped away her tears, and stood up. "Then let's finish this." Guests had already taken their seats when Emma walked into the ceremony hall. Ryan smiled confidently at the sight of her. The officiant welcomed everyone and prepared to begin. Instead of walking toward Ryan, Emma stopped halfway down the aisle and turned toward the guests. "Before this ceremony continues," she said calmly, "everyone deserves to know who Ryan Brooks really is." The room fell completely silent. Ryan's smile disappeared instantly. Emma handed the folder to the officiant, who looked confused before passing it to Ryan. As Ryan flipped through the photographs, the color drained from his face. "This isn't what it looks like," he stammered. Emma interrupted him. "Really? Then maybe everyone should hear your own words." She nodded toward me. I connected my phone to the venue's sound system. Ryan suddenly realized what was happening and rushed forward, shouting for me to stop. 2 security guards stepped between us before he could reach me. Then his recorded voice echoed through the hall. Every guest heard him laughing about Emma's trust, discussing my estate, planning the divorce, and promising Vanessa that the money would soon belong to them. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Ryan stood frozen while every lie he had carefully built collapsed in less than 2 minutes. When the recording ended, absolute silence filled the room. Ryan desperately tried to explain. He claimed the recording was edited. Laura immediately stepped forward, identified herself as a licensed private investigator, and presented certified reports documenting months of evidence. Michael followed with copies of public court records and financial documents confirming Ryan's previous fraud cases and civil settlements. Ryan's own parents stared at him in complete shock. His mother quietly whispered, "Tell me this isn't true." Ryan couldn't answer because every answer required another lie. Vanessa, who had secretly entered the ceremony hoping to watch from the back, quietly tried to leave. Laura stopped her before she reached the exit and informed her that investigators had already forwarded evidence concerning financial fraud to the appropriate authorities. She lowered her head without saying a word. Emma removed her engagement ring and placed it in Ryan's hand. "You were never in love with me," she said calmly. "You were in love with what you thought you could take from me." Then she looked at the guests and smiled through her tears. "The wedding is cancelled. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry you had to witness this." Instead of embarrassment, she received applause. One by one, friends and relatives walked past Ryan without saying a word. Many stopped to hug Emma before leaving. Within 15 minutes, the beautiful wedding venue was almost empty. Ryan attempted to contact Emma repeatedly over the following weeks. She never answered. Eventually, attorneys representing several previous victims contacted Laura after learning about the investigation. Combined with the new evidence, civil actions were reopened, financial fraud allegations resurfaced, and Ryan found himself facing consequences he had managed to avoid for years. His consulting firm terminated his employment after reviewing the evidence. Vanessa disappeared as soon as the legal problems began, proving that their relationship had been built on greed rather than loyalty. The future Ryan had spent months planning vanished almost overnight. A month later, Emma and I sat together on the porch of the lake house Ryan had dreamed of stealing. She asked me a question that stayed with me. "Dad, when did you first know?" I smiled and looked across the water. "The day I realized he spent more time performing kindness than actually showing it." She nodded quietly before taking my hand. "You saved me." I shook my head. "No. The truth saved you. I only made sure you saw it before it was too late." Looking back now, I don't consider what happened revenge. Revenge is driven by anger. What I did was driven by responsibility. I never shouted. I never threatened. I never broke the law. I simply allowed a dishonest man to believe he was in complete control until his own lies became impossible to hide. He entered my car every morning thinking he was using an ordinary retired driver. He never realized he was giving a father exactly what he needed to protect his daughter. In the end, I didn't destroy Ryan's life. Ryan destroyed it himself. I merely turned on the light so everyone could finally see who he really was.